This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 90 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week, as we usher in March, we are joined by one of the faces of college basketball. He is an insider for CBS Sports. He loves Italian food. He doesn't sleep until May. He is Jon Rothstein. Jon, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I have plenty of stuff that I want to ask you about, but the first thing is, how do you get through March without drinking coffee? Is it replaced by a lot of energy drinks?
I've never drank coffee, Brandon, so I just kind of have never been accustomed to putting caffeine into my body. So I don't know any different. You just plow through. And, the mindset I've always tried to have is that you hope that all the major news stories and everything is done by the time you land in New York on that Tuesday after the national championship game. That to me has always been the point where, I might be able to go get a cocktail or a Peroni, on that Tuesday afternoon, as long as all that stuff is tied up.
So it's not, you've never had coffee. It's not like you have a different form of caffeine.
No, I have never had a cup of coffee. I have never had a glass of wine. I have never played golf, and I've never been to Hawaii. And prior to 2022, I had never been to Europe. But my wife and I went to Europe on our honeymoon in the summer of 2022, which was a life-altering experience. I don't know if it's as life-altering as a VCU home game at the Siegel Center, but, it was pretty good. It was good. I think we stayed a little bit too long, though. We went to a third country. We had a wedding with some friends in New York and France, and then we went to Italy, which, as you can imagine, was nothing but Peronis, Tirales, and pasta for 7 days. And then we went to Greece after that. I don't know if we needed the third stop in Greece. It's tough to be in a situation where you're eating great Italian food, great pizza, great pasta, drinking Peronis all the time. And then you go to obviously Mykonos and Santorini, which were great. But people are like, well, we really want to interest you in this great Greek salad. It just doesn't hit so much if you're a foodie.
Oh, see, I like the Greek salad. I mean, I like the pasta as well, but I like the Greek salad. I like all the fresh fish and everything that you get in Santorini and Greece. But I always did it. So we did a trip to Italy, then we did France and London, we combined, and then we did Greece. So I've never done the kind of tour of Europe in one shot. So I could see it getting to be a little bit long. But the fact that no coffee, no wine, and going to Italy, going to all these Italian restaurants and not having it. I mean, if you're Peroni, okay, but not accompanying the pasta with wine or finishing it with a cup of coffee just seems crazy.
I love Peroni. I mean, Peroni is my drink of choice. I mean, that the sight of a Peroni and a bag of Tirales is what's going to get me through these next 5 weeks. I'm telling you.
So do you know the best Italian restaurants in every college basketball town?
Well, I mean, I don't want to obviously diminish any college basketball town, but, as you know, Italian food is not going to travel as well outside of the Eastern time zone as maybe it will. There's a couple of good spots in Chicago I like. Gibson's Italia, I'm a big fan of. The Rosebud is decent as well, but there's only so many spots you can really trust if, you're fortunate enough to be in, from the Northeast, or in my case, be in New York City and, have these restaurants at my fingertips.
So with some of those other Midwest cities, I mean, is it Olive Garden or do you go?
I won't waste the calories. I won't waste the calories. It is a battle. It is literally I feel like I'm in a Thrilla in Manila as I get past 40 right now, not just to stay in decent shape, but to also exercise without having a sore back or a sore knee. So just trying to obviously fight the battle each and every day. I pick and choose my spots where I'm spending my calories. It is a daily battle.
Yeah, I live that battle too. You're known for your catchphrases. I'm sure everybody has their favorite. Off the chain is the one that kind of stuck with me.
Off the charts. Off the charts.
Off the charts. Well, yeah, the OTC. But was this the repetition of catchphrases a social media strategy? Was it by design or did it just kind of happen?
It just kind of happened. I'm somebody who obviously is a non-player or a non-coach in the media industry. And, coming up, the people I leaned on as mentors in this business, Frank Isola, longtime, Daily News reporter, covered the Knicks. He's also on Pardon the Interruption right now on Sirius Radio. And he's, been a great friend and a great mentor. And he always, was like, look, if you are a not player or a non-coach, you have to obviously look at things from a news perspective and forwarding stories and having a grasp on the subject that you're covering. But also in this time, you need to obviously show your personality. And I knew that simply reporting on news and giving opinions on college basketball, those can cut through and those can resonate. But the real key in sports media to cutting through and resonating is to do things in a way that nobody else is doing. And after a while, I just realized, because, sometimes social media is an exact reflection of who we are in real life. I was just being myself on social media, and it was resonating. And I just remember, like, somebody said, like, Bo Ryan has never finished lower than 4th in the Big Ten during his time at Wisconsin. And I was like, well, then there's a third constant in life: death, taxes, and Bo Ryan. And I was like, wait a minute, that might stick. And then I just remember one night, if I'm not on site, at certain times during the NCAA tournament, I'm on a wrap-up show on CBS Sports Network, which some nights will start way past midnight because we have to wait for, obviously, the games to go. And, you're getting on the air and it's after 1 o'clock. And I just remember saying, we sleep in May. And I was like, wait a minute, there might be something there. So I don't force these things. Obviously, if something comes to me, it comes to me. But it's obviously become part of what I have tried to do to add, fun and obviously enjoyment out of the vocation. And I'm just fortunate enough that I can, participate in a sport that has unequivocally the greatest postseason that we have in sports. And that's what's on the horizon now, as you and I and the rest of humanity embark on this 5-week journey. Brandon, this is March.
Did you get the trademark for This Is March?
No, I looked into it a couple of years ago, but it didn't stick. So I'm fighting that battle, and I'll just have to keep quote tweeting when people say This Is March for the rest of my life with a short "it spreads." But it is what it is.
And where did "Stay Hungry, Stay Humble" come from?
It was just something that I think I had heard, covering sports for so many years, that I probably heard coaches say in a press conference, or coaches say when I was, at a practice and they were talking to their teams. I just think, Brandon, one of the things that, I think we've learned, as you go through life, all of us, is that success is a really, really fleeting thing. So even if you're fortunate enough to do a really good interview, even if you're fortunate enough to do a really good podcast, even if you're fortunate enough to be ahead and break a story, that's going to dissipate really quickly. So I think it's important with everything that we do to understand that the way to accomplish everything, whether it's in sports media or somewhere else, is to wake up every day with the mindset that you haven't accomplished anything. So I know each and every opportunity that I have, starting with this podcast, is obviously an opportunity to get better and to refine our craft. And that's something, I will say, I've had, a number of opportunities, during my time at CBS to work with Ian Eagle. I worked with him in Bill Raftery last Saturday for the Seton Hall St. John's game. And Ian's another person that I've leaned on, as a mentor in this business. And, he told me once in one of our conversations, we all have to keep trying to get better. We all have to keep trying to improve in everything that we're doing. Just because you get a certain assignment or you consistently get certain assignments doesn't mean that we're a finished product. So humility is really, really important to me. Having an understanding that, what we do is really important and we should take pride in it. But, we are just obviously people too that are passing through this world. I'll never forget this. In the 2016-2017 season, I wasn't assigned to work this game, but, one of my bosses at CBS said, hey, there's a UConn game on a Sunday, it was in January. Can you jump on the sideline and do it? And I said, sure. And it had snowed a little bit the day before. And I was driving up the Merritt Parkway to do the sideline for the game. And I hit black ice. And I've told this story before. And I lost control of the car. And I went into the guardrail. And I pulled the e-brake. And I spun around and totaled my car. I cracked a couple of ribs, but I was okay. And I had a lot of PTSD a couple of months after that. And, you start thinking, I think, when you come face to face with your own mortality, is this it? Should I be doing more with my life in terms of, just trying to be the best that I can be in my vocation. Because if I get 9 stores in a row, if I get 9 great interviews in a row, all I'm going to be thinking about is what's number 10. And I remember one of the things that helped me get out of that time in my life, the first Saturday after the Final Four, I was just going for a walk in New York. And I wound up, believe it or not, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, just kind of aimlessly. And I was just thinking to myself, most of these people in here don't really pay any attention to what I do, or the fact that North Carolina and Gonzaga was too officiated, in terms of there was too many whistles in the first half on Monday night. So it's important to, take ourselves really seriously in terms of the work that we're doing, because we have a responsibility to do, obviously, our best job each and every time. But it's also important to remember that we are not the center of the universe. My wife, who I love dearly, she's my best friend. Her brother, a couple of years ago, moved to Denver. She told me a couple of days ago, hey, I'm going to go the first week of the tournament because you're going to be working. Hold on one sec. This is a call I gotta move. I'm getting adjusted to an iPhone, so I gotta make the adjustment right there. Ringtones and alerts on silence. My wife told me, she's going to be going to Denver to visit with her brother the first week of the tournament. And, she's obviously making plans to connect with her brother, and that's great. And I think a friend of hers from USC, where she went to school, is going to join her. But I was just like, so you're not going to support your husband, the first week of the NCAA tournament? I mean, these are things I wish I would find out on a first date. But she also, and again, she likes sports. She went to USC during the heyday of Pete Carroll and Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart. She also has showed me that, I think it's great that you love your vocation, but there is a world outside of it. She's like, she's not planning, obviously, her weekend on whether or not Ben McCullum and Drake can get the automatic qualifier on March Madness. And I'm like, look, nobody's perfect, but you're admitting right now that you hate fun.
So, well, what has helped improve your, I guess, work-life balance more? Was it that car crash, or was it getting married?
The car crash definitely, I think, changed my perspective on everything in life because of how quickly things can change. And I don't want to say another incident this week, but I can share this with you. I haven't told many people about it. I have bad allergies, and I've had bad allergies for years. So I was just sick of it, obviously, at the end of last season. So I decided I was going to get allergy shots this year. So this season, which always happens after the Final Four, I was going to rid myself of allergies. So I usually get shots every Monday, Wednesday, and it's usually quick. After the gym you go, they put 2 shots in your arm, you move on. So there's 32 shots to complete the cycle. I was on my 31st shot on Monday. I get a shot in each arm, just like every week. I walk outside, I don't feel well, I sit on the stoop. I go back inside, I start sweating profusely. All of a sudden, they have to come in, they give me 2 shots of an EpiPen, and I start throwing up in a garbage can. And then I'm like, oh my God, I have to do a podcast, with Randy Bennett in a couple hours. I can't be, so then they're calling EMS, they're having me checked out and all this stuff. And I just remember saying to myself, this goes to show you how quickly things can change. Just 8 years ago in that car accident, things can change in a minute. So I've always been somebody who was somebody who would go to a bar in Manhattan and say, why don't I have this assignment? Why don't I have that assignment? What are my bosses not seeing in me that I should be showing them? Am I not delivering enough? And I was missing out on all these things. And I will, I don't know if she'll listen to this or not, because obviously she's not that interested in my career, but I will give a lot of credit to my wife for showing me that, there's so much else out there. And she's like, look, if you want to follow a story, you know what I mean? You don't have to stay in your apartment to follow a story. You can still be with people. And if you have a call you have to take, you can say, excuse me, and you can get up and take the call. So that helped in a lot of ways. I'd like to think I'm still obviously as ferocious as I've always been in terms of attacking my job, but I do enjoy the time where the job isn't consuming me much more than I used to.
Did you make it to the podcast with Randy Bennett?
I made it to the podcast with Randy Bennett.
Did you grow up a college basketball fan? Because in
Huge.
New York, don't get me wrong, yeah, basketball fans love St. John's, but it is in New York, NBA and Knicks are first.
Yeah, huge college basketball fan. I remember vividly the first time that I really sat and watched college basketball was March 30th, 1991. It was a date that I remember because I remember my mother had made plans for my father and her to go out with like her college roommate and her husband for dinner. And it was the Saturday of the rematch between Duke and UNLV. Now, if you remember, the year before, UNLV had beat Duke in the national title game 103-73. And this was going to be the rematch in the national semifinals. And let's just say they were going out to dinner at 6 or 6:30. My dad at 4:30 just said, I'm not going. I can't miss this game. And I remember watching the game with him. And that was the first time I sat and really watched with my father. And, you know, Duke won 79-77. And up until that point, Coach K had not won a national championship. I remember Leitner made 2 free throws with 12 seconds left, and the rest is history. So I'm sure people in my life would probably say, well, it's great. You know, it's 7 years old. You learned what you would want to do. But they would also probably, knowing me, would probably start complaining. But for 34 years, we'd have to listen to
him. So then your media career gets started at ESPN 1050 in New York. How did you break in?
Well, ironically enough, I had done all sorts of things while I was in college, you know, for certain professional outlets, a lot of freelance writing, you know, for different outlets, you know, when I was in college, just to get bylines to build a portfolio. So in 2004, you know, 1050 ESPN Radio had something called a dream job contest, similar to an offshoot of what the TV dream job was. So I entered and I won. And this was September 2004, you know, a couple of weeks after I graduated college. And it was surreal, but I learned very quickly what it was going to take to obviously work my way up in media. You know, I was doing some freelance reporting. I was doing some weekend producing, that type of stuff. But I wasn't at that time, obviously, making anywhere nearly enough money that I could live on or do anything like that. So in addition to getting that opportunity with ESPN Radio, I started freelance writing for different college basketball publications. I started making cold calls for my friend's brother's private mortgage and real estate company. Like I was in Glengarry, Glen Ross, just to try to make some extra bucks. And with the money I was making from those 3 jobs, I actually bought airtime at a radio station in New Rochelle. It was WVOX radio in New Rochelle. Maybe 500 watts got this station, like maybe 1 gas station and 1 synagogue. But I had a show. I had a chance every Tuesday to build a demo. So I had this Rolodex of PR people and so on and so forth for my time at ESPN Radio. And I was able to get like big guests on this talk show. Like I got Billy Donovan on, I got Bill Self on, and I was, you know, creating this demo. So I do this show for a year. I'm working all these other jobs. I'm doing like a Rubik's Cube, trying to get my career going. And I remember in 2006, I got a call. There was an opening for the morning drive show on the ESPN Radio affiliate in Philadelphia. And I went down and auditioned. They put me up. I didn't get the job. Then I was up for a job at WGN Radio in Chicago. I didn't get the job. Then I went to Boston. There was an update job open at the ESPN Radio in Boston. And I didn't get that job either. So finally then, after all that, ESPN Radio New York, you know, said that there was an opening to do weekend updates on Saturdays and Sundays between like 3 and midnight. So I got that regular gig. And then I was still doing obviously all the other stuff I was doing. And I was doing more college basketball stuff for the station in March. This is March of 2007. So at that time, the MSG network, you know, regional television network in New York, had a nightly show on college a nightly show, and it was the Big East tournament, and they had me on to talk about college basketball. I'll never forget this. March 7th, 2007 was like the first time I was on TV. And I remember we taped this segment. I thought it went pretty well, but it was just surreal. It's the first time you're on TV. And I'll never forget this. I went to a bar in Penn Station and I asked the bartender to turn on the MSG network because I couldn't believe this was happening, that I was going to be on television. And all of a sudden, these commuters in Penn Station said, "Why are you changing the station? What, are you going to be on TV?" Typical New Yorkers. And I said, yeah, I am. And, you know, I explained to them, you know, my story, my path, what I was trying to do. So all of a sudden, you know, it's probably 10 o'clock in Penn Station during the Big East tournament, and this entire bar gets silent. I show up on TV. They watch the 5 to 7, 7-minute segment on the show. And all of a sudden, I just remember hearing like the loudest roar that I've heard in my life. And like up until that point in life, I didn't know it was possible to feel that way. It felt like I was like this. It was like the scene, and I was Will Smith in The Pursuit of Happiness, like after he got the job. Yeah. So I worked, the rest of that NCAA tournament. That was 2007 for MSG. Got offered a full-time contract the next year. Was there until 2010. And in 2010, this is before CBS and Turner started their partnership for the NCAA tournament. CBS Sports had something called March Madness on Demand. Now, what it was when games were only on CBS, if you were watching a game streamed, there was a studio show via our March Madness on Demand. So I got that opportunity to be a part of the CBS Sports family. The next year after doing that, I got hired, as the insider for CBS College Sports, which is led to obviously the job I have now, and through the years, other opportunities, a podcast, all these other things, more opportunities, obviously, with CBS and the NCAA tournament to follow.
So when you're hosting those radio shows earlier in your career, you're buying airtime, you're going on interviews and stuff. Was the goal to be a full-time sports radio host, or was the goal to eventually pivot to be a full-time covering college basketball, or is it just kind of, see where the career takes you?
When you're at that point, you are so humbled. It is so humbling to do that. And I will never forget this. I had to sell that show because if I wasn't able to sell that show and get advertisers, I was going to have to pay the freight even more. So I was walking up and down North Avenue in New Rochelle, going into businesses, trying to make my case to sell the show. And I'll never forget, I went into a car dealership and I talked to the owner and I explained to him what I was doing. He goes, "Are you going to have Joe Torre as a weekly guest?" And I said, "Probably not." And he goes, "Well, I'm not advertising with you." But at that point, you are so humbled. You're just trying to survive. You're saying, can I really do this? Can I get an opportunity? And I tried, as I told you, several times to leave New York and get a job because you want to be in a situation where you have a chance to pursue your dream, to be on the air. And I'll never forget, in 2010, I got offered almost simultaneously, just like the job I got at what was CBS College Sports, which is now CBS Sports Network. I got offered the opportunity by Tim McCarthy, my old boss, who I love dearly, from ESPN Radio. He offered me the chance to go to the ESPN Radio affiliate in LA and do 10-1 solo. I could move to LA and have my own show. And I probably, they had the Lakers. I think they had USC football and basketball. Like, it would have been a chance to kind of, move my career in that direction. But I also had this offer to go to CBS. And I always saw CBS Sports, because of my affinity for college basketball, as the crown jewel of sports media, because it had the tournament. It had a commitment to CBS. I mean, this is what I wanted to do. So I remember I was at a Rutgers practice on a Saturday morning. I took Tim's call and I was like, I really have to think about this, but my heart was at CBS. And look, I had the broadcasting skills. I'm not going to lie. Like, I did not know other sports like I knew college basketball, but I could work with somebody else and tee them up. And I think I could do enough research to, interview my guests well to keep a show moving. But I always found, and this was one of obviously the things that I really remember from the time I was working at the MSG network and also working at ESPN Radio, I had to do these radio shows to pay my bills, but that was inhibiting me from diving into the college basketball beat. They would say, "John, we need you to do a show. The Jets are in the playoffs with Rex Ryan and Mark Sanchez." I'm like, I got to be at the Villanova Rutgers game. I got to be at the UConn St. John's game. So because I had to do the radio stuff to make a living, I was looking for something that would allow me to make college basketball my full-time job. And, that's obviously the path that I set on. And I'll tell you, and I'll tell anybody this, it might be 2025. And, it might look like obviously I've done that, but I'm telling you, I got a long way to go.
How did you gain respect or trust of college basketball coaches?
Well, a lot of people in their 20s, want to take trips. They want to travel. They want to see the world. They want to go with people to Vegas or South Beach or, Cancun and party. I went to college basketball practices and I went to AAU tournaments. So I would regularly go with business cards, hang out at all these practices, hang out at these AAU tournaments, schmooze, spend time, build relationships, and I would do it. I remember in 2013, It's right after Steve Alford got the UCLA job. I went all the way down from New York City to a tournament in Virginia at the Boo Williams complex. It was probably 7 hours each way. And I just remember that's what I did for the weekend. And I was there all weekend and all the coaches were there. And, you might chop it up for 10 to 15 minutes, but, one game you're talking to Tom Izzo, one game you're talking to Jay Wright, one game you're talking to Coach K. And there had obviously been some relationships with these people. But, the more they see you, the more they hear from you, the more they see you're going to try to be fair, you're going to be objective, and you're going to be balanced in your reporting. There's a better chance of getting them on a podcast, which you have, getting them to obviously do a Q&A or talk about their team. And then obviously when you start doing more in terms of assignments, when your paths cross again, you hope that the respect resonates.
So what about interviewing them? Like, has it been a challenge to get college basketball coaches to kind of like open up on podcasts and in one-on-one interviews and getting them to say something different or unique?
That's on me as an interviewer, and I want to pay homage to somebody right now who was another great mentor. And I'm sad that we lost him because it was a huge loss a couple of weeks ago. Al Troutwig, who I worked with at MSG, but Al and I worked together on a lot of NBA draft stuff. Al would host the show when I would, work at MSG, and I would obviously bring the insight from the college perspective. And I remember right after the Knicks hired Donnie Walsh, he was waiting to interview Donnie Walsh, and I was sitting with him, and, he was telling me how this was a hard thing to do because Donnie Walsh was dealing with like the print media first, and then they were bringing up the television. And he said, it's on me to reinvent the wheel. So what I'm saying is it's on the person asking the questions to get the most out of the person you're interviewing. And this is another thing I want to give a shout out to. I had the good fortune of working with Craig Silver last year on the NCAA tournament, who for years for CBS, has produced, that 3:30 Saturday big college football game. For years it was the SEC, now it's the Big Ten. And we worked together on the NCAA tournament, and he really worked with me on becoming a better interviewer and trying to make sure you're getting more out of the guests. So I'm always conscious, how can I say the least as a reporter, but be in a situation where you're getting the most out of your guests? And what's interesting, Brandon, is there's so many different layers to the job, because being somebody who's concise and quick as a sideline reporter is vastly different than being somebody who is really, really opinionated on a studio show, or maybe different with their opinions and their, points on a podcast, and also different just in terms of reporting on a news story. So I think the more well-versed we can be, the greater chance we have at longevity. And that's something I'm always working on, because the roles you fill are different. And that's obviously, a mark of trying to be a versatile announcer.
Is there a role that you enjoy the most?
The studio.
The studio?
Why? Because I know that's where I'm at my best. I know that that's where I can have things resonate. I know that's where I can make opinions, and I can use all the information that I've accumulated to be in a situation, to not just give opinions, but convey information, because of the insight and the perspective that I have of college basketball. Like, there's obviously different sports, obviously, that people are going to hone in on in society. There's the NFL, there's the NBA, there's Major League Baseball, but the bandwidth, in my opinion, between people that play and coach to people who obviously are looking at things from a historical lens is, much, much, different than somebody who's just reporting on the news, like in a transactional league like Major League Baseball or the NBA or the NFL. When you cover college basketball and you're immersed in the sport, and players and transfers and trends and all these things, it's a lot different than somebody, again, who's just kind of giving like a news update and going back. So I'm thrilled for the opportunities I've gotten. I'm so grateful and appreciative to all my bosses that have given them to me. But I will say this, other than college basketball, the one sport that really, really got me going in life was the heavyweight division in boxing in the 90s. Because there was so much theater, there was so much drama. And to me, growing up, I remember vividly the first boxing pay-per-view my father bought was Tyson against Spinks in '88. And I never thought, even though Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas, that when he was right, he would ever lose. And to me, one of the most amazing things I've ever witnessed was the first time that Evander Holyfield beat him. And if you think back to Holyfield at that point, he was the guy that beat Buster Douglas. But for years, people said, but Holyfield didn't beat Tyson. So until I am regularly in a setting where I am contributing to the biggest studio shows in college basketball on a desk, I'm Holyfield without Tyson.
So did it take time for you, as being that you're not a former player or coach? Did it take time for you to be confident to give your opinions in those studio shows, or were you always confident to do that?
Well, yeah, like I don't give opinion on strategy. That is not me.
Yeah.
And I totally understand, and you know this too, because it's what you do for a living. When you're staffing studio shows, you want big names that played and big names who coached, and it's a lot different. But for me, I knew that I put in the work. I knew that I was at the practices. I knew that, I am the one who's watching these teams, talking to these coaches. I knew that I was the one with my leather shoe reporting that each and every year was going to 30 or 40 practices and paying my way to go around the country. So I take a lot of pride in knowing that I'm the hardest working, most informed person that there is on this beat. And that's never changing.
Has a college program or head coach ever offered you the opportunity to work on their staff, be a scout or an assistant in any way?
That has not come to the forefront yet, nor would I want to.
Yeah. Is there one breaking news story that you had that you would say was like most helpful to your career?
Great question. Most helpful. Let me think. I mean, in 2015, I remember I had that, St. John's was moving ahead with Chris Mullen. That kind of happened during the Elite Eight. That was a big story. I had in the middle of July that Larry Brown was retiring at SMU. That was a big story. There have been big stories. As I had mentioned earlier, big stories kind of dissipate like a vapor. I'm a day-to-day kind of guy, injury updates, scheduling, news. Like I kind of treat it all the same.
Yeah.
But I will say this, the most amazing thing to me, and it's important, like I've said, to try to do the best you can get with news, be on top of things that you can be on top of. Taglines and personality things resonate a lot more with people than the reporting side. And that's something that I've just found out through years on this, because obviously, if you're a reporter, you want to be on top of as many stories as you can, but the other stuff, the personality stuff, is the stuff that really generates with people. When I bump into people at a bar or we're talking shop, I get a lot, more like, "Hey, John, we sleep in May," than, "Hey, John, great job on reporting on that home and home series or that coaching firing or that contract extension." And I think that's why we are seeing now in our business, it changed. I mean, people aren't necessarily reading the column anymore as much as they are watching and listening to Pardon My Take. It's just the metamorphosis that we're going through.
Was there ever a scoop that you were working on and like a frustrating one in that before you were able to verify it somebody else broke it?
That's happened. That's happened for sure. And it's just part of it. I think the thing you kind of come to after a while is, you're not going to get every story.
Yeah. But
you also have to be very, very careful with the verbiage. And what I mean by that is, when I knew something down the line, you might obviously say, well, such and such is expected to hire. And now, like, I remember I was working on a story earlier this week with somebody that Utah was looking at, Alex Jensen, for their head coaching position. And I was able to find out that he was pretty much at the top of the list, but no offer was made. And, he's obviously emerged as a primary candidate, but the verbiage is really important when, you're in a situation where you're trying to report on the news to make sure that you protect yourself and you protect your credibility. That's something that I've, learned over the years.
Are you ever away from your phone for a period of time, or do you ever put your phone on silent?
No. How's that for a fast answer?
What is this? Give me is there a strange place what's the strangest place you've ever broken a story from?
So my wife and I had our first child 18 months ago, and they were moving us into the delivery unit. And they were waiting to see if we could have, our child, who we love dearly, Mila, have it naturally. And we're going through that stage of the pregnancy. But I, was tracking that the Big East and the Big Ten were going to discontinue the Gavitt games. So you're kind of sitting there waiting in the hospital room, and my wife's the best. Again, I love her to death. She's my best friend in the world. There's nobody else I would want to be with, and hang out with than her. But I was like, I just have to go take care of something, and I didn't want to do it in front of her, but I had to take a call with a source in the bathroom of my wife's hospital room while she's getting ready to deliver our first child, just to confirm and corroborate that the Gavitt games were going to be no more.
When did she realize that's what you were doing?
I don't think she realized. Then, if she did realize probably that's what I was doing, she wouldn't be surprised. She'd be like, this is what I'm going to sign up for. When we first started dating, I remember us having a conversation in Dakota Bar on 72nd on the Upper West Side, right actually near where John Lennon was shot. That was, in the neighborhood where she used to live. And we started dating, and you're talking to get serious. And I just kind of had to talk like, look, if I look or pick up my phone now, I am not ignoring you, but this is my job. If we go out to a place from now until the end of the Final Four, that's fine. It just has to be a TV because I have to track what's going on. And then she was like, well, this is what I'm going to need after the Final Four. And that was a serious talk. And then I remember there was an Illinois-Iowa game on in Champaign, and it was one of Brad Underwood's first years, and they were up 3 and they fouled the 3-point shooter. And I was like, well, hold on a second. But I vividly remember that's kind of the life she signed up for,
I would imagine you did not get married in March. Have you ever attended a wedding in March?
No, and I will say this. I have had certain people who, I don't want to say fringe friends, but they were friends at a time in your life, and they invite you to something, and they're, kind of don't understand why you can't attend their wedding because you're working during the NCAA tournament or something. And they just don't understand, obviously, what's at stake for me and just how much I'm immersed in this. And I can't also fake something. I have to do things all the way to the max. So I'm not going to go to a wedding and be on my phone and be like, where's the TV or something like that. And I'm also not going to miss, the opportunity to be a part of what we live, for all year long. If I'm going to practices in the summer, if I'm doing conference previews in July and August and breaking down and thinking about whether or not the SEC can be a double-digit league, you've earned the right to be in a situation where you can obviously enjoy March Madness. I remember somebody I went to college with, he was getting married, and I think his engagement party or something was Final Four weekend. And he's like, oh, are you going to be able to come? I'm like, no, I'm going to the Final Four. I work for CBS Sports. I'm going to the Final Four. And it probably ruptured a relationship, but is a fringe friend worth missing out on Kemba Walker giving Jim Calhoun his third national championship? At the end of the day, life's about priorities, Brandon. You know that.
I think your allegiance to college basketball can be summed up last year when the world was awaiting the verdict of the Donald Trump hush money trial. You had tweeted, source, Stanford will host Merrimack on December 17th as part of its 2024-25 non-conference schedule. And it was just everybody's timeline in that moment was Trump, and then you have Stanford, Merrimack, Trump. Were you aware of the news cycle that you were interrupting when you had that massive college basketball story?
I'm just focused on the task at hand. And remember, there's 3 things not to talk about socially: politics, religion, and at-large resumes to bubble teams during the first 2 weeks of March.
Yeah, and it happened again last night. Everything on my feed is about Trump's congressional address, and then there's John tweeting about bubble teams.
And look, dude, Boise State's in position right now to give the Mountain West a 4th team in the NCAA tournament. I can't believe that this league every single year is in position to get the volume that it's getting in the NCAA tournament.
What do you do in May? Do you have hobbies?
There's always, Brandon, there's always stuff to cover. And what I mean by that is I've dedicated my life to college basketball. So there's transfers who are going to announce where they're going to play. You got to update your rankings. You got to cover scheduling. You got to cover who's staying or going in the NBA draft. But, I'm somebody who, again, I think I've done better at this the last 7-8 years. You develop other interests. And one of my big interests is food. So living in New York, there's different restaurants. There's different places you want to check out that have different dishes. So you try to enjoy life. And I'm trying to reconnect with people who are not obviously friends of mine through college basketball, but I simply don't get the chance to visit with during the season because I'm way too busy. I'm definitely excited like, I have this, I'm trying to like firm it up. I'm supposed to have a reservation at Fort Charles, which is a great restaurant in the Village, right after the Final Four. I've been once. I mean, the carbonara is great. The cacio e pepe is great. The French dip, the burger, the fries. So this is another thing, much like the Peroni and like the Torales, I'm just like keeping my head, like, you get through San Antonio, Fort Charles is on the other side.
What did you do when the tournament was canceled? Well, first, where were you when you found out that the tournament was going to be canceled?
My apartment. I was anticipating it.
Yeah.
And it was really, really sad, obviously, because I don't know how about you, but I was like, all right, so like, so what, we're gonna go back to normal in April? Like, yeah. We didn't understand, I think, what was in store for us with the pandemic. Yeah. So I was also just really sad because, much like this year, there were so many programs that were having breakthrough seasons that year that it may never get in the position like that again. Like, and this is just all off the top of my head. Dayton and San Diego State were in position to be 1 seeds. Maybe San Diego State would have been a 2 in the NCAA tournament. Kansas and Baylor had national championship caliber teams. Penn State was going to go to the NCAA tournament under Pat Chambers. Maryland was, I thought, going to be a 3 seed. I thought it had a Final Four team with Anthony Cowan and Jalen Smith. And like, these programs may never get back to that point. So that's what I was really upset about. But you learn too by looking at what happened around us that was the last thing that obviously we should be obviously concerned about during something that's severe.
Yeah. Did you work with Doug Gottlieb much when he was at CBS? I think there was some crossover there.
Yeah,
before he went
we did. We did a little bit. Yeah.
Were you surprised that he became a college coach, or did you see that coming?
No, I thought that Doug always thought like a coach, talked like a coach. I mean, he was a great point guard for a team that went to the Elite Eight. Doug was the son of a coach. Yeah. I thought that Doug had coaching in his blood.
Do you expect that he'll get a second season in Green Bay? Do you
I do.
Anything there? Yeah.
No, I do. And look, this is what I want to say right now, because I think it's important. The Doug Gottlieb, who maybe is on social media or maybe is on the air, is not the Doug Gottlieb I think of when his name comes up. I mentioned to you the scary car accident I got in 8 years ago. Nobody that I had worked with was more of a better friend than Doug Gottlieb during that time. Checking on me, inviting me to his house, all that stuff. He is a much different person off the air. He's a great father to his children. He's a much different person off the air than what you see, obviously, on social media. And he's even said to me, he goes, if I ever go at you on Twitter, I love you. Like, just, don't take it personally. And, I know he's had a tough season. He's going through it, but he got the job late, and he'll need, an off season right now to try to right that ship. But it's also, I don't think it's ever been more difficult. Forget about Green Bay, just to be a mid-major coach. Because, I mean, think about it right now. We are now, finally able to compensate players for name, image, and likeness. It should have happened a long time ago. But now, if you're really good at the mid-major level, you're going to have an opportunity to increase your worth and go play at a higher level and make more money, which is what everybody should do. It's capitalism. And now, if you're looking at it from a mid-majors perspective, you're going to try and retain your guys. But if your guys are any good, they're probably going to go somewhere else. And look, there's also mid-major coaches who are able to have great success, and they can't move on to other jobs, and then they can't regain the momentum that they once had after maybe winning in the NCAA tournament. I've heard this. I believe Fran Fraschilla, who I'm very close with, told me this once in one of our conversations, and we're going to see this now over the next 10 days. I believe the most pressure we may see over the next 5 weeks is for these favorites in these mid-major conference tournaments. And I think it's even been amplified the last couple of years, and I'm going to tell you why. If you won your regular season title, you knew that you were guaranteed a berth in the old postseason NIT. Now, what's the big difference in the old postseason NIT now versus the new one? You played games at Madison Square Garden. Now, I may be biased because I'm a New Yorker, but that to me growing up was still an event. And if you didn't make the NCAA tournament and you were a team that could go play in the Garden, that was worth playing for. That chip is no longer there.
Yeah.
So I know there's more tournaments this year. I know Fox is doing a tournament called The Crown. They're going to do it in Las Vegas the week before the Final Four. But I think now getting to the NCAA tournament is even more of a goal where it's the NCAA tournament or bust than we've seen in past years because of the changes to the other events, especially the NIT not being at the Garden.
Has John Calipari been hurt by NIL just in the fact that like it seems more coaches are willing to chase the one and done players, where that was kind of what he did for so long?
I think the infrastructure now in college basketball has completely leveled things out. And I'll give you a couple of examples. All of a sudden now, there are different people that can compete on a more level playing field across the country. So BYU, who we've seen obviously under Mark Pope have great success, and now Kevin Young is doing a great job at BYU. They landed the top player in the country next year, AJ DeBanza. He's going there. But BYU, we know, is very strong in the NIL market. They can be competitive. So BYU is becoming a destination and a school, which remember a couple of years ago was in the West Coast Conference, that can get the number one player in the country. St. John's, because of its NIL backing, can put together a roster in a year where it can be a top 10 team, win the Big East. And Brandon, like, we don't know what's going to happen. St. John's, I think right now is on the 3 line. It could play its way to the 2 line. St. John's hasn't been a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament since 2000. That's 25 years ago. How long ago is that? Jay Wright was the head coach at Hofstra. So college basketball right now is much more level across the board than it's been. Blue blood programs are always going to be blue blood programs, but these are things we got to remember. Kansas in the last 2 years, 20-17 as of today in Big 12 regular season games. Gonzaga right now probably will have its lowest NCAA tournament seed since 2016 when it went in as an 11 and had to win the WCC tournament to qualify. And look, that's the thing that we're dealing with right now. College basketball is much more level across the board than it's been.
So when people like Charles Barkley say that NIL is ruining college basketball, do you disagree?
Yeah, I think NIL was obviously long overdue. This is the problem we have in college basketball. The game itself that we see for 2 hours, maybe more than that. You know how I feel about these shortened TV windows. We got to extend it to 2:15 or 2:30. The games themselves had never been better, in my opinion, because we have guys staying in college longer who people from the periphery are familiar with. So it makes people able to identify a little bit better with the sport. That's a positive. The negative is everything leading up to it. And what I mean by that is, what professional sport do we have in our society where there's no salary cap and everybody can be a free agent every single year? There are no rules in college basketball anymore. They don't exist. That's the problem that we have. We need some guardrails. Now, the on-court product is better than it's been in a long time, but we have no rules in the sport.
It's good for your job, though. A lot more movement, a lot more breaking news.
No question. It's constant.
Has Cooper Flagg lived up to the hype?
He's been incredible. I mean, he has been incredible. I went down to a Duke practice in the preseason, and I told somebody, this is like playing Madden or NBA Live at the lowest possible level. It looks like he's playing a video game with how seamless he moves on the court and how seamless, obviously, he kind of operates. I'm a little disappointed that we haven't seen Duke play better competition just because the ACC is so down. And unless we get a bid stealer at the ACC tournament, only 3 of the ACC's 18 teams are probably going to make the NCAA tournament, which is incredible to me. But he's been incredible. He's been the best Duke freshman since Zion Williamson.
How far can St. John's go? I mean, incredible regular season, obviously, win the Big East for the first time in 40 years. But their free throw and 3-point shooting limitations seem like they should be big concerns heading into the tournament.
This is what I want to ask you, and I said this to somebody last week because I did their game against Butler and Indy, and I did their game Saturday at the Garden against Seton Hall. If St. John's didn't have St. John's on its chest and it had Houston on its chest, would you see much of a difference?
No.
I don't think St. John's will lose its first game with Rick Pitino as the coach. I think we need to look at things right now like this. The round of 32 to me has always been my favorite round in the NCAA tournament because that's where, you really decide if you're going to have a good or a great season. But that round of 32 game is war. And what I mean by that is, St. John's is in a scenario right now where it's probably going to be a 3 seed. The 6 seed that it plays isn't going to be much different than obviously them. And I think when you look across the board now in college basketball, everywhere, I mean, Auburn, for example, is going to be the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament. And I don't have anything in front of me, but like Auburn could play a team like UConn in the round of 32. Duke could play a team like Gonzaga in the round of 32. Like, these are the matchups that we could get, so that's, I think, the thing that we need to kind of brace ourselves for here.
Do you expect Rick Pitino to finish out his D1 coach at St. John's?
Yes, absolutely.
Not looking to move elsewhere.
Now I will say this, it's on St. John's to make that right, because this may never happen again in our lifetime. I am right now 41, and the last time St. John's won a Big East regular season title, I was the same age as my 18-month-old daughter. Think about that, how long ago that was.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, 25 years since they even just won a tournament game. I know you mentioned the 2 seed, but like that was the last time they even won a tournament.
And they almost lost that game to Northern Arizona and Dan McClintock in Tucson.
What makes for a better tournament, in your opinion? A Final Four with 4 number 1s, or a Final Four with, say, no top 4 seeds and maybe no top 30 recruits?
I think you want the upsets on Friday and Saturday of the NCAA tournament. And I think then in the Sweet 16 and beyond, you want the blue bloods. But I do think certain runs captivate a country. I think Shaheen Holloway and St. Peter's captivated the country. I think Gonzaga with Dan Munson in 99 captivated the country. I think VCU captivated the country. So I think if you're going to have Cinderella story, you want the Cinderella story against the biggest brands that you have in the sport, much like when VCU beat Kansas in 2011 and went to the Final Four with Shaka Smart.
What's the right number of teams for the tournament?
68. I've said this time and time again. I'm going to say it again. Jeff Goldblum said in the film The Lost World, circa 1997, that taking dinosaurs off this island was the worst idea in the long, sad history of bad ideas. Expanding the NCAA tournament would usurp that. Now, I do want to say this. I think the NCAA tournament should be tweaked in this way. If you are good enough to win an automatic qualifier for the NCAA tournament by winning your conference tournament, you deserve to be in the round of 64 on Thursday or Friday. And then what I would like to see, I'm not just saying this because I've been fortunate enough to work on the first 4, for a couple of years now in Dayton. I think it would be better for the tournament if the first 4 in Dayton would be the last 8 at-large teams to create more compelling matchups to get people juiced for the first 2 days of the event. That's my opinion.
Is there one best tell as to help decide whether a restaurant is going to be good or not? Like, is it the chicken parm? Is it a pasta dish? Is it even maybe the bread basket? Like, how soon can you get a good feel for the quality?
I'm a big ambiance guy, but I'm also I by the beer list. The beer, they have to have Peroni.
Peroni.
They have to have Peroni. That's a must.
John, you were great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brandon. We sleep in May.
That is Jon Rothstein. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.